it's Emily Talerman here, and today we're going to be talking about how to debate directly to the judge. Now, I often see new debaters make the mistake of debating to everybody essentially but the judge. They're debating to impress their friends or the audience, the opponents, their partner, themselves, whatever, but they're not debating to the judge. And in order to win, you need to convince the judge of your argument, right? So everything you do needs to be in service of convincing the judge. Now, how do you convince a judge you don't know of your argument? Well, let's take a look. Now, the first step to convincing a judge you don't know of your argument is to use statistics to pick an argument of the least resistance. You've probably heard me tell you to pick an argument that's not an uphill battle. And let's think about it. What is your judge most likely to believe? For example, if they're a woman, they're probably likely to support gender equality. So using that very basic generalization of what the judge in that case would most likely be willing to believe, then that allows you to pick your argument in your contentions, more specifically tailored to what you think a judge is most likely to believe. For example, we're in a pretty liberal area, so you're more likely to be successful with a more liberal-leaning argument and contentions than going with a more conservative leaning argument and contentions. So using very basic generalizations to figure out what would be easiest to convince the judge of, and allowing that to influence how you pick your argument and your contentions and your evidence and your reasoning, really everything you do, is going to go a long way. Because again, you don't need to convince anybody else but the judge, and it's all about what would the judge be most likely to believe. For example, I as a young person would be more likely to be a Democrat or Democratic leaning, so if you wanted to convince me of something, you would probably go in a more Democrat liberal leaning argument. Now, let's go for step 2, making assumptions. Now, you don't have much time with a judge before you start making your case, but you need to make assumptions and learn what you can about them in that quick time span. For example, what can you infer about them, about the way they speak, their clothes, their overall demeanor, whether they have judged debate before, whether they seem knowledgeable about politics, their actual paradigm, and do they seem more on the educated side, do they not? Everything about them can go into influencing you and how you argue, because sometimes you're going to run out of things to say when you're speaking. That's completely normal, and knowing these basic assumptions about your judge will allow you to essentially fall into patterns. You're going to start using more liberal language if you think your judge seems more highly educated and well-dressed, or if they seem very casual and they respond negatively to government regulation claims and you see them shaking their head or responding. All of these assumptions, based off of things they don't directly tell you, but based off of how they look and how they respond to things in the debate, are there to help you. Because they, like anybody else, are people with beliefs. We all have beliefs, and we all have subtle ways of giving away what we believe, or most likely believe. And getting you guys to pay attention to the smaller details of your judge, and pay attention not only before, but I want you to be paying attention during the debate, because that's a huge tell to see how they're responding to your argument and your opponent's argument. So making sure that they are opponent's argument. So making sure that you are paying attention to how they are responding is going to go miles in telling you whether or not perhaps you need to start shifting your language to adapt to the way they're responding, or whether they're responding well to you. And it also might give you what clues to ask when the other team is speaking. Making these assumptions and maintaining awareness about the judge is crucial in order to making sure that your debate is directly suited to the judge you have. Because we've all been in debates where you think, I did so great, I was great, oh, but the judge was terrible. Well, perhaps you just needed to have catered to that judge specifically better, and that's what I want you guys to do. And number 3 is use those arguments to use those assumptions to tailor your argument to the judge. Like I was saying, what can you assume? Do they seem to like more regulation? Do they seem to really respond to the word freedom? Some people really have emotional responses to the word freedom, for example. What can you infer based on that? I personally have seen a lot of nodding or shaking of the head, eye rolling. All of these things tell you how your judge is feeling in the moment. Now, I often hear from new debaters that when they debate, they have no idea which way it can go. And paying attention to the subtle details of your judge is a great way to get more indicators of how to argue, how the argument's going, how essentially a way to evaluate it. But paying attention to these details beforehand and being flexible in the language you're about to use is crucial to setting up an argument for success. Again, evaluate what the judge is most likely to believe and make assumptions before you start debating and while you're debating. And number 3, implement both step 1 and step 2, the knowledge you gain from those steps, and actually have it influence your argument. Now, I'll be going over in a later video just giving you guys more language that would classically fit in a more liberal argument, and then more language that would classically fit in a more conservative argument. But if you watch the news, if you decide to watch kind of both conservative and liberal news, you'll likely hear language from both sides, which I always recommend that you do because it's important to addressing your own biases. For example, I've argued in front of judges that were absolutely conservative people. I could tell that they really liked when I talked about giving more Americans freedom and didn't really like when I talked about increasing regulation from the government. And that gave me a very strong inclination that they were conservative. So once I was able to notice that they responded really well to me talking about freedom, I was able to steer in that direction more. And I wouldn't have known that or been able to tailor the argument if I hadn't seen some conservative news, experienced more conservative language. So it's important to essentially get out of your own bias with debating as well, which I'll be helping you guys go over in a later video. But for this video, the 3 steps in making sure that your argument is tailored specifically to your judge are these. Number 1, what is your judge most likely to believe? Is your argument easy to convince someone? If you stopped someone on the street and you told them your argument, are they likely to believe you? Because unfortunately, judges are typically parents, and they're likely people you could see, at Costco. So they are the street level people. So you need to make sure that your argument is very easy to convince someone, even if you pluck them off the street. The very average person needs to agree with your argument. And step 2, making observations and assumptions based on those observations, both before you debate and during the debate. And step 3, implementing the knowledge from step 1 and step 2, and actually adapting your argument not only before the judge even meets you, not before you walk into the room, but while you're actually debating, making sure that when you are in prep, you're flexible. You know that your argument is this, but say your judge just isn't responding well to your argument, you need to be comfortable to adjust your language in a different direction to ultimately persuade them of why your argument works. I would say that this applies most to reasoning because evidence is evidence, right? You can't really change that. But when it comes to the reasoning section, you can try a variety of different language in order to convince people. And that's why I encourage you guys to remain flexible and adaptable to making sure you know how your judge is responding during the debate. So again, number 1, step 1 will be to make essentially observations about what the general person is most likely to believe and what's going to be the least uphill battle for convincing someone. Number 2, make assumptions about your judge before and during the debate. And number 3, implement those knowledges from those 2 steps and actually tailor your argument to your judge. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know or ask any experienced debater, and I'm sure they'll be able to help you. I will now hold up my notes, make sure they're in focus, and I hope this helps.